Hi, I'm Candice from Quest for Life, and I'm here this afternoon with the wonderful Shannon Harvey and Patria King. My role at Quest for Life is the programs supervisor, so I'm responsible for a lot of the intake here for our residential programs at the centre in Buntanoo. It's my huge privilege to sit with these ladies today and be part of a fantastic conversation. Shannon Harvey, as you will all have seen in the film that you've just had the pleasure of watching, is an award-winning director and journalist, and she has many accolades to her name. But I'd also like to introduce Patria King. Patria is the CEO for the Quest for Life Foundation, which she established in 1989 after a series of personal traumas, including her near death from leukemia and her own brother's suicide just after in 1982. The Quest for Life programs, workshops and groups have helped more than 120,000 people since their establishment, and they provide people with living with challenging physical, mental and emotional issues with strategies and tools so that they can incorporate mindfulness into their lives and improve their emotional, mental and physical well-being in the long term. So without further ado, I'd love to jump in. Patria, why did you want to share this video with the Quest for Life community?
Well, I've known of Shannon's work for a long time and also saw her first film, The Connection, which I thought was fantastic. So I was really keen to hear about this one. But also mindfulness really lies at the heart of everything that we do at Quest. And so I thought this would be a wonderful documentary to share with our Quest community, many of whom are also living with autoimmune diseases, chronic pain, exhaustion, depletion, all of the things that Shannon really touches on in the film. So I was so delighted to see the film and to make it available for our Quest community.
Excellent. It really is an amazing piece. I've watched it again last night, so yeah, I know it really spoke to me. Shannon, I wanted to ask you, it was mentioned in the film, the figure that a staggering 1 in 4 people will experience mental health issues in their lifetime. What were you hoping to achieve with this film?
Yeah, isn't that just astonishing? And Willem Kuyken, who's the Director of Research at the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, I think he says in the film as well that if you think about depression as a recurrent illness, which, you're more, it is often the case that if you have it once, it may come back in your life. He describes depression as a 1 billion person problem. So you think about the fact that we're in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic at the moment, and we're all talking about how many, the projections of people who may succumb to the illness. Well, let's now talk about depression and mental illness, and what does that mean? So the beginnings of this film really was that I wanted to make a film about mental health, and I wanted to make a film that was very practical. It's kind of my signature style of journalism, is to go deep into subjects, but also to offer answers that are grounded in evidence. And as you heard in the beginning of the film, it is astonishing to me that we have this wealth of evidence underpinning recommendations on what we should be eating and drinking, how much exercise we should be doing, how much sleep we should be getting, how many glasses of wine we should and should not be drinking. And yet there is no widely accepted evidence-based recommendation for what we can be doing to protect and nurture and nourish our minds. And when I realized that, it was just like, what? This is absurd when so many people are suffering. It was just astonishing to me. And that's obviously how I landed on a film about mindfulness and my Year of Living Mindfully experiment.
Thank you. Patria, did you want to add anything?
Well, just that has always astonished me as well. Why aren't we taught these strategies and skills in our early life? Because, had we told children right from the very beginning that life's a bit of a roller coaster ride and you've got no idea what's over the crest or around the corner, but it is your job to find and fasten your own seatbelt. which is the sure knowledge of how to care for yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Because then when the roller coaster swings to the left and you could have sworn it was meant to go to the right, you're more easily able to adapt and recognize, oh, the scenery's not what I expected. However, this has happened. Given that this has happened, what's an appropriate response? Rather than a helpless reaction, feeling a victim of your circumstance. And I think these are skills that actually need to be taught in school, because very young children, they have the capacity to be very deeply present to whatever they're doing. You know, when they're in the sandpit, they're not thinking about what university am I going to go to. They're feeling it, they're tasting it, they're completely absorbed in the experience, but they don't know that they're awake. And then we all fall asleep to the expectations, the assumptions, the beliefs, the judgments that we hold about life, and we live through the filter of those. And it's often suffering or inspiration, but more often suffering, that really breaks us open to being willing to learn these skills that really, if we'd been taught them when we were very young, would have saved us a great deal of pain.
Can I just jump in there before we move on? Because I really think what Petrea is saying is bang on, and that was one of the biggest realizations throughout this mindful experiment, was that really weirdly, I don't think I had ever really been taught how to suffer, and I mean suffer effectively. Whenever bad things had happened in my life before this mindful experiment, it was almost as though they were an aberration, or they weren't meant to be, or, I was raised on a diet of Disney princesses, and Snow White doesn't bite the poison apple and get a lifelong chronic illness. She gets this kiss from a handsome stranger and lives happily ever after. And so my idea of how life should be was always, well, it's not happily ever after, therefore it's wrong, or not meant to be, so to speak. And really, I've spoken to so many people who have done programs at Quest, and I know that in some ways the work that you're doing there is about teaching people really adaptive ways on how to deal with the inevitable suffering of life. Which sounds really dismal, and I'm sure, Petrea, you didn't mean to set out to become an expert in how to suffer.
Well, I think it's something that is universal, and if you didn't want suffering, wrong planet, because this is where it all happens. And we really generally wake up either through inspiration, we have some inspiration and we aspire to something, but more often it's because we suffer and we can no longer stand the torment in our own brain, and we get to that wonderful place where we say, that's it, something has to change, and it's me. I can't change the outer circumstance. We call them the Ds. I can't change the drama, the disappointment, the disaster, the divorce, the diagnosis, the death, the disfigurement, the disability, the disloyalty, the disagreement. There are lots of Ds, and everything that's second nature to us doesn't work when we hit one of these major Ds in our life. And we get to that place where we say, that's it, something has to change, and it's me. And then we can begin the return journey back home to that which is essential in us, not that which has been acquired. Then life flows fully and freely through us, and that is fantastic for our physical health, but also for our mental and spiritual well-being.
Thank you. I'm glad you both feel so strongly about that. I wanted to ask you both, actually, what do both of you see as the biggest barrier to people learning and using mindfulness meditation practices?
Well, I can start from my perspective on that, which is in many ways this experiment was about me wanting to see if practicing mindfulness every day was worth it. Like, I was looking for conviction, because I think any busy person who is thinking about starting a mindfulness practice, it's one of the biggest questions. You know, after a really hard day of work, or if the kids have been brats, or, you know, there's a lot going on, I think it's often far more preferable to sit down and watch some binge television or something else that's, you know, pleasurable, as opposed to sitting down with what is often uncomfortable thoughts and feelings and do the hard mental training. So I think there's an innate resistance to that that's quite difficult to overcome, and I had to use a number of behavioural strategies in order to stick to my year of living mindfully, and I can talk about those later. But I think that for me the biggest obstacle was conviction and belief that it was worth putting the time aside.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, that the fact is, for a long time, human beings were governed by the primitive brain, the amygdala, hippocampus, limbic system, that helps to keep us safe in a dangerous world. So if a bear comes into our cave, we get that surge of cortisol and then adrenaline that enables us to run like mad or fight the bear. And interestingly, that physiology completely stops our immune system from working, because your T lymphocytes cannot function. They virtually go to sleep in that chemistry in our body. And then, of course, in running from the bear or in fighting the bear, we used up all of that neurochemistry. And so down came all of our stress chemicals, up came our immune system to deal with the consequences of the bear. But these days we're married to the bear, or COVID-19 is the bear, or something is the bear, and the answer is not to run or fight. So we don't want our primitive brain continuing to dominate us. And human beings have evolved over time to have a really highly functioning neocortex, which is just behind the eyebrows. And that's where motivation, personality, perspective, logic, reason, our ability to bring past experiences to current circumstances, all of that is held in the neocortex. And so if you're caught up in that reactive mechanism in the primitive brain, you're not accessing the neocortex. And so a lot of our work really is about helping people to engage their neocortex, to be mindful when a reaction is starting, because a reaction is always in the body. You know, people react, it's the microbiome, the heart rate, our breathing changes, we might hold tension in our shoulders, our jaw, our neck. It's second nature to us to hold tension in our body in particular areas. But if you were to ask yourself when you're in the midst of a reaction, how old do I feel right now? We're always a little kid. We're reactivating the physiology of the 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old and living it again in the present moment. A response takes us into new territory. A response requires us to access the neocortex and make an appropriate response, not a helpless reaction as a victim from the primitive brain. And so I think a lot of this is relatively new information in some ways, but it's also very ancient in the yoga tradition, where the yoga, the Upanishads, the Vedas, they talk a lot about psychoneuroimmunology long before that word was invented, about the connection between the mind and the body. And, you know, over the last century or two, we've separated the mind and body as if there's no relationship between the two. And indeed, there's a constant conversation going on in our body between our emotions and what's going on in our cells. One of the things I was fascinated by, Shannon, was some of the photographs in the, or some of the footage in your film where you were meditating with headphones on. And I wondered, of course, mindfulness is kind of being open to what is, whether there was a particular purpose between just sitting and using headphones I thought you might have been listening to instruction, perhaps.
I was, yeah. So when I started the journey, I began by using an app. I actually ended up using a couple of different apps in the early days, just settling on which one served my purpose. Because when I first started, I really needed a guided meditation. I needed the instructions of what on earth I was supposed to be doing, because my mind was very untrained, and I had no idea really, in hindsight. You would think a journalist who's interviewed so many world-leading experts about mindfulness that I would have some sort of understanding of what I was really supposed to be doing. And in the end, it took me a full year to really actually understand what mindfulness is. So the instruction was very important in the early days. And then as I got more and more experienced after I did an 8-week mindfulness course, and then especially as I led up to the 10-day silent retreat, I've now got to a point in my practice where I don't use guided meditation really ever, unless I'm trying to learn a new technique. So isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I think, that's so for many people when they're first learning, because, you can kind of understand the theory of it, but the actual practice is quite different from the theory of it. And for most people, it's a bit of a dog's breakfast in there. And it's not until we stop and begin to witness the activity that's going on unconsciously in the brain, because we know that 95% of the time people are acting out of their unconscious. And really it's suffering or inspiration that wakes us up to life and how amazing this present moment is. And that the brain has actually evolved to a state where if it's entrained, if it's focused in the present moment, then we have access to not what is second nature to us, but to our essential nature, which have the qualities of insight and intuition, because we can pick up what's going on in the environment, wisdom, humor, spontaneity, creativity, compassion. Those are all the qualities that we have at our fingertips when the brain is focused and entrained in the present moment.
I really relate to what you're saying there, Petrea, because just before this call, actually, I did my practice, and in my struggles to work out what mindfulness is and listen to all the different expert definitions of what it is, I've come to my own conclusion, which is that mindfulness is the skill of learning to hear myself think. And what I mean by that is an emphasis on the word hear, like not listening to kind of respond, but that kind of really just absorbing and taking in and witnessing what is happening in my own mind. And now I've come to this kind of space with the practice that I actually need to just let the thoughts that need to be thought every single day, as kind of like a, because they're going to happen, these thoughts. They're going to happen on their own. And it's almost like they need to be witnessed so that then they can be let to float downstream, so to speak. And just what you were describing there just really resonates with where I'm at the moment with my practice, this kind of allowing thoughts to happen. Yeah, it's not resisting them, it's not judging them, it's not even labeling them, just letting them come past, keeping your focus steady and being aware of the thoughts, aware of the feelings, aware of the sensations, aware of the chaos, the crisis, the confusion, but actually from a deep place of peace. And that sort of sounds like, well, how can you have peace and grief at the same time? But you can actually experience the depth of grief from a profoundly peaceful place. You can have tears rolling down your cheeks. As someone said, my tears roll down my cheeks and form a river to my heart, which was such a lovely expression for someone who was grieving. And there's a rightness about grief. There's a appropriateness around grief. When you love greatly, you grieve greatly. And to be able to embrace the grief without being overwhelmed and consumed by it
is actually a wonderful gift in being fully human and experiencing everything in this human existence. We can feel almighty rage, but we might not want to act on it. We can feel almighty lust, but we might not want to act on it. So I think having that ability to witness the feeling, witness the thought without necessarily being impelled to act from that is one of the great gifts that mindfulness brings.
Petrea has a fantastic analogy that she often refers to in reference to witnessing. I'd love you to share that one with Shannon. The monkeys. Okay.
Oh, the wild drunk monkeys swinging through treetops. The Indians often describe the mind as a wild drunk monkey swinging through treetops. And I sure and all remember what that feels like. And it's an agony. Sometimes I thought I'd rather, in fact, I heard myself say to myself one day, as you were saying, listening to your thoughts, I'd rather be dead than continue living like this, where I felt that facade between me and the world that I kept highly polished for everybody else. And I heard myself think, I'd rather be dead than continue living like that. So we need to put that little wild drunk monkey that swings through treetops on the leash so that we can watch the monkey and be aware of what the monkey's up to, but not be bossed around by the monkey.
That's one of my favourites.
I think we've all got a wild drunk monkey.
Yes.
You know, Petrea, you're going to love... I'm sorry, I'm hijacking the conversation. I could listen to you talk all day and I kind of want to follow up with my own questions, but I think your wild drunk monkey analogy is going to fit hand in glove with the chapter that I've just finished writing on the book that's going to accompany the film, which is all about the kind of frontier of the neuroscience with mindfulness and our default mode network, and how mindfulness training really, it looks like, and it's very early days for the neuroscience, but it looks as though what mindfulness training allows us to do is to have some agency over our automatic processing in our minds. And although that automatic processing actually plays a really important role, when people like me who suffer from rumination, when that goes wild and is like a wild drunk monkey, or for me like wrestling a bull elephant, you know, it can be really unpleasant and it can lead to insomnia and all sorts of other mental illnesses. And really the training it gives us a kind of an agency and a kind of a leash, as you say, to really bring that back into line. Yeah. Sorry for hijacking.
Absolutely. You know, I think we've always been slightly ahead of the science. But your primitive brain is full of reactions. We react as a victim of our circumstance whenever we feel under threat. Our neocortex allows us to respond, not react. And we don't say take reactability for your life. We say take responsibility, your ability to respond to the life that you're having. You might need to weep about it, rail about it, scream about it, write about it, talk about it until you can say, yep, that happened and it happened to me. But now I have a story. I don't live in the story. And the story is important because it's our story that breaks us open and makes us willing to explore ourselves in our depths. But, you know, as I said earlier, this is, for me, the purpose of human existence. The reason why we are alive and breathing on the planet is to relinquish everything that's become second nature to us so that we reveal and experience and live in our essential nature, that which was there before we took on the limitations, the fears, the judgments, the anxieties. And at that first nature level, the consciousness that enlivens you is the same consciousness that enlivens me. If we really got that, how could I do to you what I wouldn't do to myself? It's our primitive brain that is all about competition, lack, there's not enough, I'm going to have to fight to get mine. That's all from the primitive brain. Neocortex recognizes abundance, recognizes creativity, compassion, collaboration, all of these really useful qualities that right now, as we emerge from COVID-19, if we emerge from COVID-19, but as we emerge into the new world informed by COVID-19, we have a wonderful opportunity to create the world that we've all been yearning for, one that is more compassionate, more creative, more collaborative, rather than this primitive brain where we're always seeing us and them, and we've got to be on guard and we've got to get our share. And, you know, it's time to leave all of that behind. We've all got more stuff than we know what to do with. We spend our first half of our life collecting stuff, then you've got to dust it, and then it wears out. None of the cords from the new stuff fit the old stuff until the whole planet is stuffed. And the fact is, none of that brings us joy. And what gives us joy is connection and being in service to life. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we emerged from this time with a recognition that what actually matters are human beings rather than the economy? And let's design an economy that supports human beings rather than the way it's set up at the moment, which is often where people are treated as a commodity instead of as a precious expression of life. So this is a wonderful time of opportunity, and that's why I'm excited that your film, Shannon, will open up some good, deep reasoning as to why people need to embrace the full use of their brain and no longer be driven just by the primitive brain, the reptilian brain. We're way past reptiles at this point in time.
I'd love to ask both of you, the wonderful Vijamala Birch featured in your film, and she touched on the importance of letting go of the idea of finding a cure and rather embracing the idea of healing. This is one of the major underpinnings of teachings at Quest for Life. Why do you think, both of you, why do you think this perspective is so important to understanding and learning mindfulness?
Well, in my experience, I don't know about you, Shannon, but in my experience, people who set it all out, I'm going to cure myself of this disease, there's a certain strain in that. And if my peace of mind is dependent on me not dying of a disease or not being impacted by a disease, then I could be in really tricky territory. And then I've often seen people too make, well, I've purified my diet, I meditate this long, I've forgiven everyone, I've got my crystal on, I've drunk my juice. Why am I still in pain? Or why do I still have this disease when I've done everything? So it's that list of pros and cons. If I do all of these things, then that's meant to happen. And for me, it's always been more important to go all out for peace, because peace is actually a dynamic state of being in which we feel able to embrace every moment, regardless of its challenges, with a quiet mind and an open heart. To me, that's what healing is all about, is peace, not a cure. A cure is just focused, again, on the material, because this is your spacesuit for planet Earth. You can't come here and have a human experience unless you pick up one of these. But they're full of idiosyncrasies, and you don't want what's happening in your body to dictate your reality. I live with chronic pain, but I live with chronic pain. It's not my entire reality, and I manage it very effectively, mostly through mindfulness, so that I can still make a contribution to life and still feel fully engaged with and live a meaningful life. We don't want to be buffeted by what's happening in our body or even our stories and our thoughts and our feelings. That's the peace that passes all understanding. And that's often not about a cure. I've known many people who died healed of everything that ever stopped them from living. And I've known plenty of people who died still very much in need of healing. So not dying of a disease is not, for me, something to celebrate more than finding peace of mind. Once you find peace of mind at that epigenetic level, you may very well have changed the messages that are going into the cell that are telling the gene whether to modify, suppress, or express. Last century, we were helpless victims of our genes. This century, we're co-creators of our health, because to a large extent, we have control over the epigenetic environment around the cell, which is made up of what we're eating and drinking, the quality of our sleep, the amount of exercise, the chemistry of our emotions, and the chemicals that are in the environment. That's what's in the epigenetic environment. Most of that we have control over. And so this is exciting because now we have so much scientific information that can bolster an approach that's very holistic in its nature. So I'd love to know your thoughts about going for cure or going for healing.
I really wish that I had have known about the Quest for Life Foundation and the work that you guys were doing when I was 24 and I first became ill. I think my path would have been very, very different. I did spend a lot of time going for a cure. And I spent a lot of money going for a cure, looking for answers in both medicine and in alternative therapies. And it really was when I made the connection, my first film, that things started changing for me, and I started realizing that actually what I was looking for was recovery, not cure. Recovery is a word that George Jelinek, who founded the Overcoming Multiple Sclerosis organization, he sort of really taught me that the idea of a journey, that this is an ongoing thing that I'm going for. But I'll just add one small thing to what you were just saying, Petrea, which is that the word that came to me after I met Vidyamala, it just so happened that I was in the middle of a chronic pain flare when I met her. But the word that really came to me is this word discomfortable. Comfortable despite the inevitable discomfort of being a human. And being comfortable despite my discomfort is actually one of the most profound things that happened during my year of living mindfully.
Yeah, that's wonderful, isn't it? That's being at peace with our own lack of peace.